deep in the void between galaxies, where ancient stars burn their final breaths and cosmic winds carry whispers of civilizations long dead, something impossible happened. A message broke through 40 millennia of silence, not from the living, but from the ghosts of a species that should have been forgotten. The transmission lasted exactly 3.7 seconds. 3 simple words in a dead language, broadcast on frequencies that hadn't carried signal since the Great Burning. But those words would shatter the peace of 10,000 worlds and remind the universe why some names should never be spoken aloud. The humans were supposed to be extinct. Their homeworld was a cinder. Their colonies were tomb worlds. Their mighty fleets were scattered atoms drifting in solar winds. But the dead, it seemed, had learned to scream. And when humanity screams, the universe listens, whether it wants to or not. Admiral Kethvar of the Zephanian Republic had commanded starfleets for over 2 centuries, but nothing in her long military career had prepared her for this moment. The bridge of her flagship Stellar Dominion hummed with nervous energy as her communications officer, a young Altarian with nervous tentacles, approached her command throne. "Admiral, we're receiving that transmission again. Same frequency, same duration, same intensity." His voice trembled slightly. The Altarians were natural empaths, and whatever was in that signal was affecting him badly. Kethvar's scaled features remained impassive, though her twin hearts were beating faster than she cared to admit. "Play it again, Lieutenant. Full volume." The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Then it came, 3 words that seemed to punch through space itself, carrying weight that made the artificial gravity fluctuate. "Remember. Promise." The words were in ancient Terran, a dead language from a dead species, but the universal translators recognized them immediately, and their meaning sent chills through every being on the bridge. The voice was human, unmistakably, impossibly human. "Sir," whispered her tactical officer, a grizzled Korvan veteran whose people had fought in the last human war. "That's not possible. We glassed their worlds 40,000 years ago. We watched their sun die. There are no humans left." Kethvar knew the history as well as anyone. The human Galactic War had been the bloodiest conflict in recorded history. For 3,000 years, the galaxy had been locked in a death struggle with a species that refused to accept defeat, refused to surrender, and refused to die quietly. The humans had been outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1, outgunned by superior technology, and facing the combined might of 47 different species. By all logic, they should have been crushed within the first decade. Instead, they had nearly won. The final battle at Terra had lasted 6 months. The combined galactic fleet had lost 60% of its ships and billions of lives just to crack the human homeworld's defenses. When the planet finally burned, when the last human city was reduced to radioactive glass, the galaxy had wept with relief. The peace that followed had lasted 40 millennia. Civilizations rose and fell, new species evolved and joined the galactic community, and slowly, gradually, the humans became legend. Then myth. Then, for most of the younger generations, they became nothing more than cautionary tales told to unruly children. But legends, Kethvar realized with growing dread, had a way of coming back when you least expected them. "Admiral," her science officer called out, his crystalline form shimmering with barely contained excitement. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout this sector. Whatever sent that transmission is big, very big." "Define big, Commander." "Planetary scale, sir. Multiple signatures all moving in formation toward the neutral zone." The neutral zone. The empty region of space that separated the core worlds from the outer rim. For 40,000 years, nothing larger than a research vessel had been permitted to enter that area. It was a buffer zone, a scar on space itself where the final battles of the human war had been fought. Magnify long-range sensors. I want to see what we're dealing with. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying the endless void of deep space. At first, there was nothing but distant stars and drifting debris. Then the sensors adjusted, and Kethvar felt her blood turn to ice. Ships, dozens of them, hundreds of them, massive angular vessels that looked like they had been carved from black metal and starlight. They moved with perfect precision, their hulls scarred by eons of battle, their weapon ports glowing with barely restrained energy. Human ships. "By the 7 suns," breathed her communications officer. "They're alive. They're actually alive." The fleet that appeared on their sensors defied every law of physics and logic. These weren't ancient derelicts or ghost ships. They were active, powered vessels with full crews and operational weapons. But that was impossible. The humans were extinct. Their technology had been studied, catalogued, and surpassed centuries ago, or so everyone had believed. Sir, incoming transmission from the lead vessel. This time, HFY didn't hesitate. On screen. The view screen shimmered, and suddenly they were looking at the bridge of a human ship. The figure that appeared was tall, lean, and unmistakably human despite the advanced technology integrated into his body. His eyes glowed with artificial light, his arms were clearly cybernetic, and when he smiled, his teeth gleamed like polished steel. But it was still a human face, a human voice, a human soul staring back at them across 40,000 years of supposed extinction. "Greetings, Admiral HFY," the figure said in perfect galactic standard, though his accent carried the distinctive cadence of ancient Terran. "I am Captain Marcus Chen of the Terran Remnant Fleet. I believe we have some catching up to do." "Impossible," HFY whispered. "You're dead. All of you. We killed you." Captain Chen's smile widened, and there was nothing pleasant about it. "Death is a temporary condition, Admiral. We've learnt that the hard way. Your people made sure of it. What do you want?" she demanded, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. "What we've always wanted," Chen replied. "To go home. To reclaim what was stolen from us. To honor the promise we made to our children as they burned in nuclear fire." The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. But the human fleet continued its approach, and with each passing moment, more ships appeared on their sensors. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands upon thousands of vessels emerging from the dark spaces between stars, converging on the galactic core like antibodies responding to an infection. "Get me high command," HFY ordered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Emergency priority. Tell them the humans are back and they're bringing friends." As her communications officer scrambled to establish contact with the Republic's leadership, HFY stared at the growing armada on her screens. Each ship was unique, clearly built from salvaged materials and alien technology, but they all shared certain characteristics. They were scarred, battle-worn, and radiated the same implacable purpose that had made the humans so terrifying during the war. These weren't refugees or survivors seeking sanctuary. These were warriors returning from a 40,000-year campaign in hell itself, and they had not returned empty-handed. Long-range sensors detected strange energy signatures around the human ships, massive structures that seemed to phase in and out of normal space, technology that defied every known law of physics. And life signs, billions upon billions of life signs representing species that shouldn't exist. The humans hadn't just survived their supposed extinction. They had thrived, they had evolved. And they had made allies in places the galactic community had never dreamed of exploring. "Sir," her science officer reported, his crystalline voice tight with disbelief. "I'm reading dimensional distortions around their fleet. They're not just traveling through normal space. They're using some form of interdimensional transit. That's why we never detected them before." "How many ships?" HFY asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Counting active vessels, support craft, and what appear to be mobile habitats. Approximately 50,000 ships, sir. And more are still arriving." 50,000 ships. The combined fleets of the entire Galactic Republic numbered less than 10,000 vessels. And these weren't just warships, they were entire civilizations on the move, refugee fleets carrying the hopes and dreams of species that had been forgotten by time. "Admiral," her tactical officer called out urgently, "we're receiving additional transmissions, not from the humans, from the other ships in their fleet." "Other ships? Sir, I think you need to hear this." The communications array crackled to life, and suddenly the bridge was filled with voices speaking in languages both familiar and utterly alien. But the universal translators worked overtime, converting the cacophony into understandable speech. "This is Commander Thale of the Andromedian Exiles. We stand with humanity." Captain Vexai of the Voidwalkers reporting. "The humans kept their promise to us. Now we keep ours to them." Wing Leader Sartok of the Star Wraiths. "We who were forgotten remember those who remembered us." The transmissions continued, each one representing a different species, a different fleet, a different story of salvation and alliance. The humans hadn't just survived, they had become the focal point for every species that had ever been cast out, abandoned, or left for dead by the galactic community. "My God," HFY whispered. "They've been collecting them. For 40,000 years they've been gathering every lost soul in the universe." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The humans hadn't retreated to lick their wounds or hide in shame. They had gone into the dark places of the universe, the spaces between galaxies where only the desperate and forgotten dwelt. They had found the species that had been exiled, the civilizations that had been wiped out, the refugees who had been abandoned to die in the void, and they had forged them into something new, something unprecedented. An alliance not of convenience or politics, but of shared suffering and mutual salvation. The last transmission came directly from Captain Chen himself, his image appearing once more on the view screen. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood representatives from dozens of different species, all wearing the same expression of grim determination. "Admiral Kethvar," Chen said, his artificial eyes glowing brighter. 40,000 years ago, your people made a promise. You promised to hunt down every last human in the galaxy. You promised to wipe our name from history. You promised to make sure nothing of us would ever remain." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Well, congratulations. You kept your promise. You killed every human who lived in your galaxy. You burned our worlds, scattered our fleets, and turned our children into atomic dust. But you made one small mistake in your thoroughness." The camera pulled back, revealing the vast bridge of the human vessel and the massive fleet visible through the windows behind him. "You assumed that this galaxy was all there was. You forgot that space is infinite, that exile doesn't always mean death, and that some promises are worth keeping, even when keeping them requires you to become something more than human." The transmission began to fade, but Chen's final words rang clear. "We promised our children that their deaths would not be meaningless. We promised them that humanity would survive. We promised them that someday we would come home. Well, Admiral, someday has arrived. And we brought friends." The screen went dark, leaving Kethvar alone with the weight of history bearing down on her shoulders. Through the viewports of her flagship, she could see the lights of the human fleet growing brighter as they approached. Each light represented not just a ship, but a story. A tragedy. A people who had lost everything and found something worth fighting for in the endless dark. The galaxy had thought the human war was over. They had been wrong. It had only been intermission, a brief pause while humanity gathered its strength and assembled the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. Now the second act was about to begin, and this time, humanity wasn't fighting alone. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened on Nexus Prime exactly 18 hours after Admiral Kethvar's first contact with the human fleet. Representatives from 47 member species filled the massive amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the translation system struggled to process. Fear hung in the recycled air like a toxic gas. Chancellor Vexani of the Hegemony called for order with her forearms spread wide, her insectoid features rigid with barely controlled panic. She had been hatched long after the human war ended, but, like every galactic leader, she had studied the historical records. She knew what humanity was capable of when cornered. "Fellow beings," she began, her mandibles clicking nervously. "We face an unprecedented situation. The extinct human species has returned with a fleet of unknown composition and hostile intent. We must act swiftly to contain this threat before it spreads beyond the outer rim." Ambassador Theclon of the Crystalline Collective disagreed, his mineral body resonating with harmonic discord. "Chancellor, with respect, our intelligence suggests this is not merely a human resurgence. Our deep space sensors indicate the presence of technology and life forms that predate known galactic civilization. We may be dealing with something far beyond our understanding." The debate that followed was heated but brief. Everyone in the chamber remembered the stories their predecessors had passed down. Human ships that could appear and disappear at will. Human soldiers who fought for days with mortal wounds. Human commanders who would sacrifice entire fleets to save a single civilian transport. The species that had once held the entire galaxy at bay for 3 millennia. But those same records also showed their weakness. Humans were individuals, prone to disagreement and internal conflict. They had powerful emotions that could be manipulated. They valued the lives of their civilians above military objectives. These traits had ultimately led to their downfall when the Galactic Fleet had forced them to choose between saving their worlds or winning the war. Chancellor Vexani was about to call for a preliminary vote when the Chamber's communications array activated without authorization. The massive holographic display at the center of the amphitheater flickered to life, showing not the expected fleet formation data, but a single human face. Not Captain Chen from the first contact, but someone else entirely. This human appeared older, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of millennia. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made the assembled representatives instinctively lean forward. "Honored delegates, the human said in perfect galactic standard. I am Dr. Sarah Chen, speaker for the Terran Remnant and the Alliance of the Forgotten. I understand you're having a discussion about us. How refreshable. Unfortunately, you're operating under several critical misunderstandings that I feel compelled to correct. Security forces moved to cut the transmission, but their efforts proved futile. The signal was being broadcast on frequencies that their technology couldn't isolate or block. First, Dr. Chen continued, you seem to believe this is about revenge. It's not. Revenge is a luxury we abandoned 40,000 years ago when we were fighting for our survival in the void between galaxies. What you're seeing is the fulfillment of a promise, which is an entirely different matter. The image shifted, showing the vast human fleet in detail. But now the assembled delegates could see the full scope of what they faced. The human vessels were massive, but they were dwarfed by the alien ships that accompanied them, structures that looked like living coral, vessels that seemed to be made of pure energy, craft that existed partially outside normal space-time. Second, the human continued, you believe you're dealing with a human fleet. You're not. You're dealing with the collective representatives of every species that the galactic community has ever abandoned, exiled, or left to die. We represent the Voidwalkers, who were cast out for their dimensional research, the Andromedian exiles, whose home galaxy was consumed by the dark energy experiments your predecessors conducted, the star wraiths who were declared extinct after your mining operations stripped their homeworlds bare. Chancellor Vexani tried to interrupt, but her voice failed to carry over the human transmission. Third, and most importantly, Dr. Chen said, her tone becoming deadly serious, you assume that we want something from you. We don't. We're not here to negotiate, to make demands, or to seek redress for past grievances. We're here to collect what belongs to us and to ensure that certain promises are kept. The scene shifted again, showing massive construction projects in the space beyond the outer rim. Structures the size of moons were taking shape, clearly designed for habitation on a scale that boggled the imagination. For 40,000 years we have been preparing, not just to survive, not just to return, but to build something better, something that won't repeat the mistakes that led to the Great War. We have learned much in our exile, gained allies thought impossible, and developed capabilities that your science cannot yet comprehend. Ambassador Theclon managed to activate his communication array. What do you want? He demanded, his crystalline form pulsing with agitated energy. Chen smiled, and there was something both sad and terrifying in that expression. We want you to remember, Ambassador. Remember what you did to us. Remember the promises your predecessors made. And remember why certain doors should never be opened. We want the locations of the memorial sites, she continued. Every world where human civilians died, every system where our colonies were burned, every piece of space where our children's ashes drift in the solar wind. These places are sacred to us, and they have been abandoned for 40 millennia. The request seemed reasonable, even touching. Several delegates began to relax, thinking that perhaps this could be resolved through diplomacy. But Dr. Chen wasn't finished. We also want the historical records. All of them. Not the sanitized versions in your public archives, but the classified files that detail exactly what your predecessors did to human prisoners, to human children, to human civilians who tried to surrender. Now the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Those files existed, but they had been classified at the highest levels for good reason. They contained details of atrocities committed during the final phases of the human war, actions taken in desperation and anger, that no civilized species wanted to acknowledge. And finally, Dr. Chen said, her image seeming to look directly at Chancellor Vexani, we want you to understand something very clearly. The war never ended. It simply moved to a different theater. For 40,000 years, while you celebrated your victory and built your peaceful civilization, we were fighting for survival against things that make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. The image changed one final time, showing glimpses of battles fought in the space between galaxies, creatures of living shadow that devoured entire worlds, mechanical horrors that converted matter into antimatter with casual efficiency, entities that existed outside normal physics and fed on the suffering of intelligent beings. We survived because we had to. We evolved because we had no choice. We made allies because isolation meant death. And we learned that sometimes, in order to protect what you love, you have to become something terrible. Dr. Chen's image returned to the center of the display. Your ancestors thought they were ridding the galaxy of a dangerous species. What they actually did was forge that species into something far more dangerous in the fires of exile and desperation. Congratulations. You created us. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. But within minutes, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Human ships were appearing in hundreds of systems, not attacking, not threatening, but simply present. They took up positions near memorial sites and old battlefields, areas that had been abandoned for millennia. More disturbing were the other reports. Deep space monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures emerging from the spaces between galaxies. Ancient automated probes that hadn't transmitted in eons suddenly came back online, broadcasting warning signals in long-dead languages. And throughout the galaxy, archaeological sites that had been dormant for thousands of years began showing signs of activity. Chancellor Vexani called for an immediate recess. But before the delegates could file out, their personal communication devices activated simultaneously. Each received the same message, delivered in their native language by a voice that carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent 40,000 years preparing for this moment. To the representatives of the Galactic Council, you have 72 hours to provide the requested information and grant access to the memorial sites. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. If you comply, we will conduct our business peacefully and depart when we are finished. If you refuse, you will learn why your predecessors were so afraid of us. The message ended with coordinates, thousands of them, marking every system where major battles of the human war had been fought. Each coordinate was followed by a timestamp indicating when human forces would arrive at that location. The exodus from the chamber was swift and panicked. Representatives rushed to contact their home governments, their military commands, their intelligence services. But as they did, a disturbing pattern emerged from the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. The humans weren't just visiting memorial sites, they were conducting archaeological excavations. Massive projects that involved technology far beyond current galactic capabilities. They were digging into the quantum foundations of space-time itself, extracting something that sensors couldn't identify. Admiral Kethvar, still on station at the edge of the neutral zone, received regular updates from her science officer. Sir, they're not just excavating. They're rebuilding something. The energy patterns match theoretical models for quantum resurrection technology, but the power requirements would necessitate the complete conversion of several star systems. Resurrection technology? Kethvar asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Theoretical process for reconstructing quantum patterns from residual energy signatures. In simple terms, bringing back the dead. But it requires massive computational power and energy sources that we've never seen deployed on this scale. The realization hit the Admiral like a physical blow. The humans weren't just honoring their dead. They were trying to bring them back. All of them. Every human who had died in the war. Every civilian who had been killed in the bombardments. Every child who had been vaporized in the nuclear fires that consumed Earth. My God, she whispered. They're not here for revenge. They're here for resurrection. The implications were staggering. If the humans succeeded, if they actually managed to bring back their dead, the galaxy would be facing not just the survivors of extinct species, but the entire human population that had existed at the time of the war. Billions upon billions of individuals who would remember exactly how they had died and who had killed them. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what it revealed about human capabilities. Quantum resurrection was theoretical technology, mathematical models that existed only in the most advanced scientific papers. The power requirements alone would need the complete energy output of multiple stars. The computational demands would require artificial intelligences more sophisticated than anything the galaxy had ever produced. The humans hadn't just survived their exile. They had transcended it. As Admiral Kethvar contemplated the scope of what they were facing, her communications officer received another transmission from the human fleet. This one was addressed specifically to her from Captain Marcus Chen. Admiral, his image said when she accepted the communication. I believe you're beginning to understand the situation. Good. Understanding is the first step toward wisdom, and wisdom is what your species will need in abundance over the coming days. What are you doing to our galaxy? Kethvar demanded. We're keeping a promise, Chen replied simply. 40,000 years ago, as our worlds burned and our children died, we made a vow. We promised them that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. We promised them that someday we would come home. We promised them that death would not be the end of their story. He paused, his artificial eyes glowing brighter. Dr. Chen explained our immediate requirements. But perhaps I should clarify the larger scope of our mission. We're not just here to collect the dead, Admiral. We're here to collect the truth. Every classified file, every hidden record, Every piece of evidence that shows exactly what happened during the final phase of the war. That information is classified for good reason, Kethvar protested. Some truths are too dangerous. Chen's laugh was cold and mechanical. Admiral, we've spent 40,000 years living with the consequences of those dangerous truths. We fought wars against cosmic horrors that were accidentally released when your predecessors cracked open dimensional barriers in their desperation to find weapons that could stop us. We've sacrificed entire civilizations to contain contaminations that spread when your scientists tried to weaponize temporal paradoxes. The captain's image leaned forward, his expression becoming deadly serious.
You want to know the real reason we survived when we should have died?
It's because the universe itself became our enemy when your predecessors' war crimes tore holes in the fabric of reality. We learned to fight things that exist outside physics because fighting them was the only alternative to letting them consume everything. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar staring at empty space and trying to process the implications of what she had just heard. The classified files from the human war contained more than just records of atrocities. They contained evidence of experimental weapons, forbidden research, and scientific projects that had been deemed too dangerous to continue. If the humans had spent 40,000 years dealing with the consequences of those experiments, if they had been fighting a secret war against cosmic horrors, unleashed by the galactic power's desperation, then their return wasn't just about justice or resurrection. It was about containment, and perhaps, though Kethvar hardly dared to think it, salvation. The 72-hour deadline expired not with explosions or fleet movements, but with silence. The human ships that had positioned themselves throughout the galaxy simply began their work, and the galaxy watched in fascination and terror as the true scope of humanity's return became clear. At the ruins of Terra, where Earth had once spun in peaceful orbit around Sol, massive structures began emerging from dimensional folds. They looked like crystalline flowers the size of moons, each petal inscribed with patterns that hurt to look at directly. The structures positioned themselves at precise coordinates where major population centers had once existed, and began broadcasting energy patterns that made local space shimmer like heat mirages. Admiral Kethvar received her orders to investigate personally. The Stellar Dominion approached the Terra system with extreme caution, senses straining to understand what they were witnessing. What they found defied every law of physics the galaxy thought it understood. "Sir," her science officer reported, his crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated deep confusion. "The humans are manipulating quantum information on a scale we can't measure. They're not just excavating the ruins of their worlds, they're reading the quantum echoes of everything that ever existed here." Through the viewports, Kethvar could see the ghostly outlines of cities beginning to take shape around the crystalline structures. Not solid buildings, but transparent, shimmering images that showed Terra as it had existed 40,000 years ago. Streets full of human children playing. Parks where families gathered for celebration. Schools where young humans learnt about the galaxy they hoped to someday explore. Then the images changed, showing the final days of the siege. The orbital bombardments that had turned those same streets into rivers of molten glass. The children running in terror as nuclear fire consumed their neighborhoods, the families huddling together as their world died around them. "They're not just remembering," Kethvar whispered. "They're making us remember." Captain Chen's voice came over the communications array without warning, as if he had been listening to her thoughts. "Exactly right, Admiral. Memory is the first step in resurrection. You cannot bring back what you have forgotten." "This is impossible," she protested. "Dead is dead. Quantum patterns decay. Information is lost to entropy. You cannot recover what no longer exists." "Under normal circumstances, you would be correct," Chen acknowledged. "But the deaths of our people were not normal circumstances. They died in nuclear fire, Admiral. Fusion reactions that temporarily converted matter into pure energy. For exactly 0.00000001 seconds, every atom in their bodies existed as quantum information suspended in space-time." The Admiral felt a chill run down her spine as she began to understand. That information didn't disappear, Chen continued. It became part of the quantum substrate of local space. Normally, such patterns would degrade within microseconds, but our people died in such massive numbers, with such concentrated energy, that their collective quantum signature became stable. It's been echoing through space-time for 40,000 years, waiting for someone with the right technology to hear it. "The right technology," Kethvar repeated. "You mean the technology you developed during your exile?" "Not developed, Admiral. We stole it. Borrowed it. Traded for it with species that exist outside normal space-time. Do you know what lives in the spaces between galaxies? What feeds on the quantum phone that fills the void? We do. We've been neighbors with entities that were ancient when the first stars formed. The transmission shifted to show the human excavation sites throughout the galaxy, but now HFY could see them clearly for what they were. Massive quantum computers, each one capable of processing information at scales that boggled the imagination. They were reading the quantum echoes of the past and rebuilding human civilization from the ground up. We didn't just survive our exile, Admiral, we learned from it. We made alliances with beings that your science insists cannot exist. We mastered technologies that your physics says are impossible, and we never ever forgot what we were working toward. More reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human archaeological sites were becoming active construction zones, with structures that seemed to phase in and out of reality taking shape around them. But these weren't just memorial sites anymore. They were becoming populated. Ghostly figures began appearing in the quantum reconstructions, translucent at first, but becoming more solid with each passing hour. Humans who had been dead for 40 millennia were taking their first breaths in eons. Children who had died in nuclear fire were opening their eyes to see their home worlds restored to quantum perfection. My God, breathed Chancellor Vexani during an emergency transmission to Admiral HFY. They're actually doing it. They're bringing them all back. But the resurrection process revealed something that made the galactic leadership's worst fears seem trivial by comparison. As the dead humans returned to consciousness, they brought with them memories not just of their deaths but of their experiences in the quantum substrate. For 40,000 years, their consciousness had existed in a state between life and death, aware of everything that had happened in the galaxy during their absence. They knew about the cover-ups. They knew about the classified experiments. They knew about the cosmic horrors that had been unleashed by the galactic power's desperate search for weapons to use against humanity. More importantly, they knew what those horrors were planning to do next. Dr. Sarah Chen appeared once more on the galactic communication networks, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood figures that Admiral HFY recognized from historical records. Human leaders who had died in the war, scientists who had been killed in the bombardments, children who had been vaporized in the nuclear fires.
Fellow beings of the galaxy, Doctor,
Chen said, her voice carrying new weight as she spoke not just for the survivors, but for all of humanity. We have completed the first phase of our return. Our people have been restored to life, our worlds have been reconstructed from quantum memory, and our civilization has been reborn from the ashes of exile. The image shifted to show the Terra system as it now existed, a perfect reconstruction of the pre-war human homeworld, complete with cities full of people who remembered being dead. But there was something different about it, something that made the restored world seem more than it had been before. However, Dr. Chen continued, resurrection is not our primary objective. It never was. We returned because the galaxy is in danger, and we are the only ones who know how to stop what's coming. The scene changed to show images that made Admiral HFY's blood turn to ice. Regions of space, where stars were going dark not from natural causes, but from something that was actively consuming them. Dimensional rifts that poured forth creatures of living shadow. Reality storms that turned entire systems into chaotic maelstroms, where the laws of physics no longer applied. 40,000 years ago, your predecessors opened doors that should have remained closed, Dr. Chen explained. In their desperation to find weapons that could destroy us, they conducted experiments with forces that exist beyond the normal universe. They succeeded in creating weapons of unimaginable power, but they also succeeded in attracting the attention of entities that feed on the collapse of reality itself. One of the figures behind Dr. Chen stepped forward, a human male with silver hair and eyes that held the weight of cosmic knowledge. Admiral HFY recognized him from historical records as Dr. Kuro. James Morrison, the human scientist who had been killed when the galactic forces overran Terra's primary research facility. I am Dr. Morrison, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 millennia studying forces beyond galactic comprehension. I was the lead researcher on humanity's dimensional defense project. I died trying to contain the entities that your predecessors' weapons had unleashed. He gestured, and the display showed technical diagrams that hurt to look at directly. These entities exist in the spaces between realities. They consume the quantum foundations of space-time itself, leaving behind voids where nothing can exist. 40,000 years ago, there were small incursions, manageable with the right technology and sufficient sacrifice. The diagrams changed, showing the current state of the interdimensional threats. They had grown exponentially during the millennia of galactic peace, feeding on the stability of reality itself. While you celebrated your victory over humanity, these entities have been growing stronger. They've been preparing for a final assault on this reality, an invasion that will consume not just your galaxy, but every galaxy in the local cluster. Dr. Chen resumed speaking. We survived in exile because we learned to fight them. We made allies with species that exist partially outside normal space-time because they were the only ones who understood the threat. We developed impossible technologies because impossible problems require impossible solutions. The image shifted one final time, showing the true scope of the human fleet. The ships they had first seen were just the beginning. Behind them stretched armada that defied measurement, vessels the size of planets, structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and entities that were clearly not technological constructs but living beings of immense power. We are not here for revenge, Dr. Bun, Chen said, her words echoing with the authority of an entire species reborn. We are here because the galaxy, your galaxy, our galaxy, the galaxy we all call home, is going to be attacked by forces that make the human war look like a minor territorial dispute. Captain Marcus Chen stepped into view, his cybernetic enhancements glowing with energy patterns that seemed to extend into dimensions the viewers couldn't perceive. In approximately 6 months, he announced, the entities that have been feeding in the void between realities will begin their final assault on normal space-time. They will consume entire star systems in minutes, turn civilized worlds into nightmare landscapes where the laws of physics break down, and ultimately reduce this entire region of the universe to quantum foam.
He paused, letting the implications sink in.
However, we have spent 40,000 years preparing for this moment. We have technologies, alliances, and capabilities that can stop them. We have weapons that can wound things that exist outside physics, soldiers who can fight in environments where reality itself is unstable, and allies who remember what the universe was like before the first stars formed. Doctor, Sarah Chen stepped forward again, but we cannot do this alone. The defense of reality itself requires cooperation on a scale that has never been attempted. Every species, every world, every individual who wants to continue existing in a universe where mathematics works and physics applies will need to contribute to this effort. Admiral Kefar found her voice at last. What do you need from us? Everything, Dr. Chen replied simply. Your fleets, your manufacturing capabilities, your scientific knowledge, your population bases. We need to convert the entire galactic civilization into a war machine capable of fighting entities that exist outside the normal universe. And in return, Dr. Sarah Chen smiled, and for the first time since this crisis began, it was an expression of hope rather than threat. In return, we teach you how to transcend the limitations of normal space-time. We share the technologies we've developed during our exile. We introduce you to allies who can show you wonders beyond imagination. And we ensure that when this war is over, the galaxy that emerges will be stronger, wiser, and more capable than anything that has ever existed. She paused, her expression becoming serious once more. But understand this clearly. The choice is not between war and peace. The war is coming whether you accept our help or not. The choice is between a war where we fight together against incomprehensible odds, or a war where you face annihilation alone, while we retreat to the spaces between galaxies and watch your reality collapse from a safe distance. The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy to contemplate a choice that no civilization should ever have to make. But as Admiral Kafar stared out at the human fleet, now revealed to be far more than anyone had imagined, she realized that humanity had already made their choice 40,000 years ago. They had chosen to survive. They had chosen to transcend. They had chosen to become something more than human so that humanity itself could endure. Now they were offering the same choice to the galaxy that had once tried to destroy them. The question was whether the galaxy was wise enough to accept.